Hello, welcome to episode 15 of the series on Introduction to Programming. Managing complexity is one of the largest challenges in programming. In this video, we will take a look at one approach to managing complexity by using functions to extract logic and reuse it. Let's take a look. So beforehand, we had something like var x equals 3, and we could do for var I equals 0, I less than x, x plus. And inside of these brackets, we could write out our I variable. And if we do this, it counts out 0, 1, 2, all the way up until we get to 3, and then it exits. So this chunk of code here that I've highlighted, it is being reused. Now, this isn't the most convenient way to reuse it, because if I wanted to, say, do another loop and do something similar, maybe start at -1, and I run this, then it's a little bit awkward because I'm duplicating this code over every single time I would want to use it. So in JavaScript, we have a way called a function that allows us to basically make copies of code that we can use in different places of our application. So a function, for example, starts with the keyword function. We can give it a name. We put parentheses after we define the name, and then brackets. And so this is the basic structure for how you define a function in JavaScript. One of the things we could do is we could take this chunk of code here, and we could say, instead of having this loop down here, we could replace this loop with this function call. And so if I run this, it'll do the exact same thing. Right? If I add another call to this function, it'll do it twice, and then it'll do this last loop here. Right? Place that last loop, and I call it 3 times. We'll see 0, 1, 2, and it'll happen 3 times over, because every time we call this loop, it'll run the code inside of here. And so it's very easy for us to manage the complexity of our code by creating a function and then what we call invoking a function by calling it here. What if we wanted to do different things every time we called the function? One of the ways we can do that is by providing parameters into our function definition. So for example, if I wanted to say, pass in limit, and I could replace this x variable here with limit, what we can do is we can now pass in our limit to each of these functions. And so inside of here, this is called an argument. We specify an argument within the parentheses of where we are calling our function or invoking our function. And we can pass in a variable as an argument, right? So the x that we pass here will then replace the value for limit, which will be used inside of our function. So if I run this, nothing new happens. If I change it to, say, 4 for x, and I run it, it'll now go from 0 to 3. Similarly, we can add in another parameter for where we want to start. So if I pass in 0 for start, I can have them all do the same thing as they did beforehand, but I can also change it so that I am passing in different values. So the function will have a different value for start each time it calls. Limit will be x, which means it is 4 every single time. So we see it goes 0 to 3, then it goes 1 to 3, and then 2 to 3. Right, so this is how we can define a function, have arguments be passed into our parameters that we specify, and then we can make use of those parameters within this function. We can assign a function to a variable. And so instead of me specifying write loop every time, I could change the function that I'm calling because I've assigned it to a variable. So if I run this, it'll still do the same thing. But say I had a different loop, one where it starts at the limit and it goes all the way down until it gets to start. Actually, I need to do this way, and I need it to go iterate downwards, so it's going to be decrement operator. Right, so if I wanted to do a function here, right, I can have the original one will do this, but if I change my variable to right loop down, and then I run it, it'll now run and go starting at 3 all the way down for each of these functions we've called. So we can change the function we call by assigning it to a variable. And this gives us even more flexibility in how we can use functions. We can not only directly call them, but we can also assign them to variables and then make use of them. So it gives us a lot of flexibility when it comes to managing complexity, taking small sections of code and making it so that we can reuse them in different parts of the application. This is very convenient because we could assign a variable or a function to a variable. But what we can also do is we can directly define a function to a variable. And in this case, we don't need to give it a name because we have a variable that we can refer to, but we can do things like define it so that the limit is double whatever we passed in. And again, if I run it here, you can see that it goes from 0 to double what we specified, which is just under 8, so up to 7. And so the 3 times we call it, it goes from 0 to 7, 1 to 7, 2 to 7. Right? And we don't have to give the function a name. We can just simply assign it directly to a variable and then make use of it. So this is another way that we can define functions. We don't have to give them names, but we can directly assign them to variables. This is referred to as an anonymous function. The reason why it's anonymous is it doesn't have a name. So there is, well, an anonymous person doesn't have a name, so an anonymous function also doesn't have a name. Functions are how we create building blocks for larger programs in JavaScript. Splitting our code into smaller chunks allows us to manage complexity. In future videos, we will look at more ways we can use functions. Have a good day.